I want to welcome everyone to our legislative wrap-up panel. This is part of our Get to Know Your Government and Community Leaders series. And also I want to remind our legislators that if your microphone sounds like it's crackling, just move a little farther back from it and we should be fine with that. We want to give a big thank you to Ellettsville Town Hall for allowing us to use this wonderful space. We're grateful to our presenting sponsors, Bloomington Board of Realtors, for their support. And in just a moment, I'll invite Alex Everett to introduce our moderator and our panelists. We also want to recognize our gold sponsors of today's event, Indiana University Office of the Vice President for University Relations, and Monroe County Farm Bureau Incorporated. We truly appreciate your support. We also want to thank our premium partners. These are members who support the Chamber at the highest level, and you'll see their logos on our slideshow. Please mark your calendars for our ribbon cutting next Wednesday at Easy Clean Laundry. That's on July 11th at 11 a.m. On June 20th, we have our Power Your Business Luncheon featuring Crane, and that is sponsored by First Financial Bank. On July 23rd, the town of Ellettsville will have a ribbon cutting and grand opening at the new Department of Public Works building. That's right over here. Our picnic in the park is sponsored by the Nice Agency and Danbury Real Estate, and that will be on Friday, July 11th. You can find out more information about all of these events on our website. And now I'm pleased to welcome Alex Everett from Bloomington Board of Realtors to the podium.
Good morning. Thank you. The moderator for this event is going to be Gretchen Gutman. A veteran in legislative and government policy, is the vice president of the public policy for Cook Group Incorporated. Before joining Cook, Gretchen served as the AVP of Government Relations at Ball State University. She was also a partner at the law firm of Taft, Stetenis, and Hollister, LLP in Indianapolis. Please forgive me if I do not pronounce names correctly. Gretchen also spent 8 years as the Chief Fiscal Advisor to the Senate Finance Committee of the Indiana General Assembly. During her time on staff, she worked on a number of public policy issues, most notably property tax reform, charter school legislation, pension reform, gaming legislation, and the state's biennial budget and school funding formula. Gretchen received a bachelor's degree in history, an MPA from Indiana University, and a law degree from the Indiana University Robert H. McKinney School of Law in Indianapolis. Round of applause. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Representative Peggy Mayfield. Is she here? She just got here. Good timing. Serves Indiana House District 60, which covers portions of Johnson, Morgan, and Monroe counties. Representative Mayfield was first elected to District 60 in 2012. She is vice chair of the House Public Policy Committee and serves on the House Insurance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. Round of applause for Peggy. Representative Matt Pierce serves Indiana House District 61, which covers parts of Monroe County. Representative Pierce has held the District 61 seat since 2002. He is Assistant Democratic Floor Leader and is the ranking minority member of the Indiana House Utilities, Energy, and Telecommunications Committee. He also serves on the following committees: Courts and Criminal Code, Elections Appointment, Rules and Legislative Procedures, and the Statutory Committee on Ethics. Round of applause. Representative Dave Hall serves Indiana House District 62, which includes all of Brown County and portions of Monroe and Jackson counties. Representative Hall was first elected to the Indiana House District 62 seat in 2022. Representative Hall serves as Assistant Majority Whip, Vice Chair of the Utilities, Energy, and Telecommunications Committee, and as a member of the Local Government Committee and Natural Resources Committee. Senator Shelley Yoder represents District 40, which includes the majority of Monroe County. She serves as the Senate Minority Leader, ranking minority member of the Environmental Affairs Committee, and minority member on the following committees: Appropriations, Education and Career Development, Health and Provider Services, Joint Rules, Rules and Legislative Procedure, and the School Funding Subcommittee. And last but not least, Representative Bob Heaton represents District 46, first elected to House in 2010. Representative Heaton serves as Majority Whip and on the Ways and Means Committee, Higher Education Subcommittee Chair, and Financial Institutions Committee. Representative Heaton represents all of Owen County and portions of Clay, Monroe, and Vigo counties.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you. Good morning to our distinguished panels. It's wonderful to be with you all. Since everyone got up early this morning and is here to listen to a legislative wrap-up, I thought it would be fun to start our morning out with some fun facts, because who doesn't love fun facts on a Tuesday? So as you all know, this session was our long session, which means that the General Assembly met from January to the end of April. So I thought I would share with you some of the statistics around the number of bills that were introduced and the end product. So the number of introduced bills that the General Assembly dealt with in introduction this year from the Senate was 483 bills. The House introduced 683, for a total of 1,166 bills. Bills that got out of committee in the first House, that in the House of Representatives, was 296. In the Senate was 271. So in the dealing with second reading amendments, they were dealing with, between the two chambers, 567 bills. Out of the second chamber, the House passed out 231, the Senate 160 for a total of 391. You see the funnel? So as you can see, the committees really are the workhorse of the General Assembly. That's where all of the work gets done. Bills that actually cross the finish line out of the total number of 1166 was 243 bills. So basically, the 80-20 principle does apply to the General Assembly. So lots to talk about, given the number of bills that were introduced and number of bills that worked through the process. So let's turn to our experts and let's listen to the session wrap-up. So my first question is, and I'm going to start with you, Representative Heaton, and we're going to go that way. Can you give us an overview of how your priority bills fared in the 2025 Indiana General Assembly?
Well, thanks for that question, Gretchen, and thank you all for being here. When it comes to bills and the number, sometimes I remember one time the Senate, it was almost unlimited what you can file, and I remember at that time it was State Senator Jim Banks, and he had 40 bills that he filed, and I asked him about one bill that I was really curious about, and he wasn't sure about that bill, because once you have 40 bills, like, wow, how do you focus on that? And I had about 2 or 3 bills, really, but I suppose on a local level in Terre Haute in Vigo County, we had a bill, I think it was House Bill 1543, and that pertained to getting a magistrate there in Vigo County. And they've been after that for a number of years. And I added Representative Tanya Path on that bill with me, since she really her district is just about all of Terre Haute. And that was a bill that had a fiscal of, it was $213,000. But it passed out of committee, I think 10-0, and it went to Ways and Means because of the fiscal, and I was able to amend that bill in House Bill 1144, authored by Chris Jeter. And that started the process, and it ended up went over to the Senate and so forth, and conference committee, and worked things out. And bottom line is, we were able to get that bill. But we had in committee Judge Sarah Mulligan over there and Judge Dan Kelly, and they testified and explained the need that we had to have a magistrate over there, and it just worked out well, and I'm glad we were able to get that done. So, but anyway, it's a process, and sometimes we have to be patient to the very end, and that's when it passed out of the conference committee reports, and we were able to get it done. So that was probably my, I guess, big priority bill that I got to see through.
Senator Yoder.
Thank you so much, Gretchen. I came here so many weeks ago and had some priority bills, and as Gretchen so masterfully explained, that funnel is real, and I came away with some exciting wins, though, for somebody who serves as a minority member. There is a handout in the back, and it's so pretty. Grab it on your way out. On one side, it has wins that I worked on one side, and then there are some challenges that finished our session and some things to look out for the coming next session. But or at least the coming year, changes that are going to be made. Some of the wins, when I came in, I think it was January, I spoke of 3 different bills that I was working on. And one in particular was Senate Bill 176. And at the time I came here, it was scheduled for its first committee hearing. And I'm so happy to say that it was signed by the governor, and it's one of those 243 bills that made it all the way through. And what Senate Bill, or Senate Enrolled Act 176 does is it was the direct byproduct of last summer making my way through some of our skilled nursing facilities, from rehabilitation all the way to full-time or your traditional nursing home facility. And what I kept hearing again and again was how our nursing shortage is really being a challenge for many of our skilled nursing facilities. But we see this and we hear that the nursing challenge is real at every intersection in our healthcare industry right now. So based on that, I came back to our legislative agency, our legislative services agency, and asked, what can we do? I had one executive say to me, if we could just somehow harness our young adults who are in high school right now, interested in the field, are taking coursework in this area to enter into the nursing field or into the healthcare field. But once they graduate, the way our code is written currently, they have to retake those exact same courses again to count toward their LPN license. And I thought this is a win for both our young people, our students, our high school students graduating, and for the healthcare shortage in nursing. So we worked together, and that bill will allow those courses that students are taking in high school to count towards their LPN, which is a great win, which is exciting because as I was revisiting those facilities in the last couple of weeks, I put together this skilled nursing tour. And at one of the places, I was asking, what do you need? And the director of the facility said, well, we actually need more solutions. Like there was this one bill, I think it was 176. I was like, oh my goodness, that was the bill we worked on together, and it made it. And it was really exciting to hear how they knew about it and how it was going to directly impact them. So that was a priority for me. Another priority for me was a bill that I filed that really addressed crimes against children. And it would change every place in Indiana code in talking about the phrase child pornography to child sex abuse material. And the reason why that change is so significant is it too came out of a conversation I had at a town hall last summer. And the town hall was really about the diploma changes that we were seeing and getting feedback from constituents. But there was a retired Indiana State police officer there, and he waited until after, and he came to me and he said, is there anything we could do? I worked in the sex crimes unit, and that phrase is so antiquated and actually re-traumatizes people who read it. And you know, upon hearing it, you think, oh my goodness, of course, because there is some consent implied in the word pornography. And so we worked, while my bill that I filed, that bill didn't make it. I used that language, applied it to another bill, it made it through the Senate, and then that bill didn't get heard in the House, so I had to find another home for that bill in the House that was going to be heard, and eventually it made its way through and it was signed. So it didn't start out how I wanted, but it still made its way through and now is going to do good for the state of Indiana. And then the other area was childcare. There definitely is a shortage in childcare, in accessing and in affordability. And we worked on Senate Bill 463 that made it all the way through. I wasn't the author of that bill, but I was a co-author with Senator Charbonneau, and I'm grateful for those relationships that I have in across the aisle and in my own party to find ways of making good change for residents of Indiana. So those were 3 priorities that I started with. They looked different upon the conclusion of the session, but in the end, it didn't really matter how it made its way through. It still ended up being good policy and an enacted policy for the state of Indiana. So thank you. I heard from so many of you after that meeting, and it really did help inform the way that I was able to legislate throughout the whole session. So thank you to the Ellettsville Chamber and to all of you for staying connected with me.
Representative Mayfield.
Good morning. So I apologize if I look like I'm about to fall out of my chair. I've been dealing with vertigo for 3 days.
Oh, no.
So I have episodes of like a drunken sailor. So out of the bills that I filed, I really learned a lesson in pride of authorship this year, because not a one of them went through with me as the primary author. However, the language of at least 3 of my bills did make it across the finish line using Representative Hall's method of amend it into someone else's bill and let them do all the work. So one of them was, the Ellettsville food and beverage tax, which took a totally different look by the time it was over the finish line, but there was a version that passed. Aviation Public Works got put into another Public Works bill. And actually, there is a ceremonial signing with the governor on Thursday afternoon for that bill. Collaborative distilling, which, this is all boring alcohol stuff, but there are aspects of our alcohol code that needed to be addressed. In this particular bill, my focus, my language was, when you do collaborative distilling, you're allowed to have a certain percentage from one origin and a certain percentage from another origin in the same bottle. Well, once it's in the bottle, you have no way to determine how much came from one guy or the other guy. So the ATC even said, we can't enforce this. So that was the basis of the language, my part of the language in collaborative distilling. And then I'm trying to think if there was another one. I get these. There was a bill that passed the Senate, and I was a sponsor, and I had a sister bill in the House about discrimination against living donors. But they couldn't, even though it passed the Senate, when it came over to the House, when we were looking at it more deeply, so the argument was, I have donated a kidney or a liver. Those are really the only 2 items that you give as a living donor. Now I go back for life insurance, and because they know that I've donated one of my organs, my rates are higher than it was before the donation. We couldn't find in the industry enough of that to determine that it is a discriminatory policy. Now, you may have one company who says, we don't want to write that. That's different than being discriminated against across the board. So, a problem for one person is not a problem for all people. So that did not make it across the finish line once it got to the House. If we have more incidents or more cases of that, we may reconsider that. And then I was working on the indemnification of parks for obstacle courses. This is very popular throughout the state. The ropes, the tires, that type of obstacle course in a public park. Except the insurance industry doesn't want to insure it because we can't define it. Atterbury has it, Johnson County has one, there's one up in the northern part around Huntington County. They have one. So I was trying to include the definition of an obstacle course into, we have there is a definition that already exists about, not high risk, but my words are failing me.
Like skateboard
Yeah,
parks?
extreme sports. And I was trying to get it into that, and that would indemnify them. So let's say you're climbing the ropes and you fall and break your arm. Or even now, currently, if you trip over roots on a trail, you could potentially be exposed for some liability. So we're just trying to wrap that up. However, we have a lot of trial lawyers who don't like immunity from anything. So I'll just have to keep working on that. I think that there's a way to get there. But again, when you're dealing with this, as Senator Yoder said, you see how the funnel works. You have to be willing to make those compromises. What comes out at the end might not be what went into the beginning, but there are aspects, and it's the benefit. Are you still getting a benefit, or do you just want to give up and start over another time? A lot of times in the process, when you are an author of a bill, you still have some control over whether that bill moves forward. So in the case of getting amended into another bill, you sort of lose that control. So even when legislative process, strategy-wise, I'm thinking, okay, if they change it over in the Senate, when it comes back to the House, I may dissent, I might make some changes. Well, when they amend it into another bill that's under another author, you don't have that kind of control anymore. So there are so many, we call the multi-level chess game that you learn over the course of a legislative career. I'm still learning some of those moves.
Thank you. Representative Pierce.
Yeah, I think that some of the examples we heard here just shows that a good legislator will just focus on getting the policy enacted and try to avoid the personality clashes or work around them, because believe it or not, there are occasionally personality clashes in the General Assembly, which might shock you. So I had a bill that came out of a summer study committee of courts and corrections, where we got testimony from the Vanderburgh County Sheriff that some people showed up in their community, were committing burglaries, and they had something called a signal jamming device with them. And this is kind of a little transmitter you can carry around with yourself, and it will basically block out cell phones. Any wireless door cameras will get basically disabled. If the police show up, they try to use their radios to talk to dispatch. It can interfere with that. And those devices are completely illegal under federal law. But as you can imagine, trying to get the Federal Communications Commission, which has the job of enforcing that, to be paying attention to all these cases across the country, and then they got to get the Justice Department to move on it. And so we kind of concluded that we needed to have some state law that would mirror the federal law, so that local prosecutors could go ahead and prosecute that, and maybe more importantly, seize the equipment from the bad actors, so they're not able to jam things up. So some of you might know that one of my hobbies is amateur radio. I'm one of those geeky radio people, and so all things radio frequency are really fascinating to me. So I started spouting off in the committee about all this jamming stuff, and the chair of the House committee basically said, why don't you just carry this bill since you seem to know all about it? So we had a bill that essentially would mirror the federal law and the state law, pass through the House, no problem, go over to the Senate. They also had a bill that came out of the Senate which had the same policy goal but was had some significant differences which I thought were problematic. And so we took, as often happens, well, first we thought the Senate would just hear my bill over in the House, but the author over there on the Senate side really felt that his bill had to be the one. So we decided in the courts committee we would move the Senate bill, but we'd basically put my provisions into it. So it basically became the House bill. So then it went over to conference committee, a little bit of haggling about a few minor provisions, got that straightened out, and the conference committee report was signed and voted into law. So now the local prosecutors have the ability to do something about these signal jammers without having to ask the feds to try to come in and do it. And so that's just an example of how if you get really hung up on like, my name's got to be on this, I want to have the glory of going back home and saying I did this, a lot of times you won't get stuff done. But this idea, which is another one I use often, is just get your stuff in somebody else's bill and then sit back and be very quiet about it and let the other guy do all the work. That's also a very good approach.
Representative Hall.
Yeah, thank you. So they've talked a lot about me sitting back and letting other people do the work. So I'll explain that. I had a bill. Brown County has 15,000 residents in the county. They get well over 1 million visitors every year, and that puts a strain on their resources locally. And they struggle to kind of keep up with the maintenance of like the Deer Run Park. They're wanting to do some advancements there. They got the log jail that's there in town. I can't remember the name of the other place, but the fairgrounds, like they're trying to make investments there in the county that when you have the visitors come in, they see something nice, they get to use it, and everybody gets to enjoy it. So they had a 5% innkeeper's tax, and they wanted to, increase that and give them the capacity to move that up to 8%. So I thought about authoring a bill on that, and then I had this idea, like I could just put that in someone else's bill and let them do it. So Peggy, or Representative Mayfield, was the lucky recipient of my language. When I took it to the Ways and Means office, I said, can you help me find a home for this? And her bill was the home for that. And then as the process played out, the language that she was carrying to benefit Ellettsville and the rural transit ended up coming out of her bill, and my language survived. And then her bill got morphed into another bill, and my language survived in that. So it was really, my aim is to do that as often as possible, because if I can just get the language through and not have to do all, because it's work to get a committee chair to hear your bill, and then to get the bill out of the committee, and then to get the bill through the second reading amendments and out of the House, and then get it into the Senate is an entirely different problem. So this year I had a bill, or it was a resolution to require term limits for members of Congress. And I tried that last year and ran into some trouble in the Senate in the Judiciary Committee, and it failed in the Judiciary Committee. So this year, we had the Senate pass it out first, and then I sponsored it in the House. So it made it out of the Senate this year, and we got it through the House, so that we signed that resolution, I don't know, it was in March or April. So Indiana was the 11th state to join 10 other states to call for members of Congress to term limit themselves. It calls for an Article 5 convention. That takes 34 states to actually trigger a convention. Historically, that's not happened, because once you get close to having enough states to trigger a convention, the Congress just acts themselves, because they don't want the states deciding their term limits or any issues, so they usually preempt that. So that made it through. That was my only win, other than the one that Representative Mayfield got through for me. But I have several other bills that I've worked on. Representative Pierce and I think Senator Yoder has been involved in this. There's a bill that would allow counties to enact a gate fee at the state parks to help them with public safety and infrastructure improvements. And I struggled to get a hearing for that the last 2 sessions, and then this session got a hearing, passed out unanimously, passed out of the House with just a handful of no votes, went to the Senate, got it through the Senate, Natural Resources Committee, and then it got sent to appropriations. And when stuff gets sent to appropriations, sometimes it's because it needs to be, and sometimes it's just going there to die. So that bill just went there to die. So I took that bill language and I got it inserted into another bill because it was successful with Representative Mayfield. So I thought, well, maybe I could do that again. And I did not have the same luck with that second time around. So I'm still like, when I got there, some of the best advice I heard, there was another legislator that had been there for several years. And he told me, he said, Dave, just remember, this place is not Burger King. You don't always get to have it your way. And that has been like the best advice, because you have 150 people up there and you may have a great idea, but everybody wants to get their hands on it or insert their language into it. So you just kind of, you learn, and you don't give up. You just come back the next year and you just kind of revise it and try to get something through that looks like what you want. So take the smaller wins. But I had another bill that made it out of the House. It would require research facilities to adopt out animals once they're done doing testing on them. Pretty bipartisan issue. I mean, everybody loves dogs and cats, and it doesn't have anything to do with mice or rats. So if you hate them, this was not included in my bill. That got out of the House. I think I had like 4 no votes on that. Got in the Senate, and I couldn't get a hearing in the Senate. So I'm working on that this summer. I think Trump had the NIH, they shut down their animal testing facilities. They had some beagle testing facilities. They shut those down. So I'm hoping there's some like recognition that this is not like it's not a far left, it's just a common sense. If, these dogs and cats have served our humanity by being tested on, for these drugs, and to give them a life where they can, rather than just euthanize them, to just let them live out the rest of their life in a home with people that love them. It just seems like a no-brainer to me. So I'm going to work on that again next session. And then I had an annexation bill, and this one caused me I have 3 teenage daughters, and running for this office, I had black hair when I started, and I had mostly a black beard. So I don't know which has contributed more to my hair falling out and my gray beard, but this annexation bill, we have involuntary annexation. You guys are all familiar with this. And Ellettsville is kind of unique, because Ellettsville, people want to be annexed into Ellettsville to get relief from the burdensome zoning and regulations that are in the county. So it's not every community is like that. Bloomington did their involuntary annexation, or has attempted it. And the problem with that is when you do an involuntary annexation, the people that are being annexed, they didn't ask for it. They just got drawn into this map. And the city wins by default if those people do nothing. So then it forces those folks that didn't ask to be annexed, forces them to go out and do work. They have to mobilize, they have to get signatures, they have to raise money. So the city has spent millions of dollars trying to annex these folks that didn't ask to be annexed. And they've had to spend, I think it's $250,000 to $300,000 that they've spent, that they've had to raise on their own to fight the city. So I think there should be the burden should be on the city. If the city wants to annex, it should not be, we're going to annex you, now you need to go do work to fight it. It should be the city saying, hey, we want to annex you, and here's why you should want to be annexed. Here's what we're going to do for you. And it should be a voluntary thing. So I worked on that bill, and that took a lot of, I met with Representative Pierce, and I said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. And I think his words were, I appreciate that you're trying to thread this needle, but this is going to be difficult to do. And it was not wrong. But we got to a really good place. I think there's a chance that I can maybe not have that language in a standalone bill in the next session or future sessions, but to incorporate that into if I can get it into a House Republican agenda bill, that would be ideal in some like government reform bill. So I'm going to try and work on that to get that into because it's just, right now, there's nothing I can do for the folks that are being annexed or, attempting to be annexed by the city. But once that's done, if the city's not successful, there's a 4-year cooling off period, and they could go through all of this all over again. And I just, talking to these folks, I knock on a lot of doors, and I get to visit with them. And it's just, it's a stress. It's just something that they don't need. And, I'm a huge advocate for landowner rights, and this is just something that it's been a tough, the Senate has passed a similar bill. I think like 9 times now, but the House just has a different filter for this. So I've got to find this sweet spot where I can run it through. So that's definitely going to be high on my list for next time. I've got some other bills, but none of them were successful either, so I won't talk about all those.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's interesting, even though the question was talk about your priority bills and the successes, each of you indicated that it was, if you didn't have pride of authorship, you could be very effective in getting things done, working with your colleagues, as Representative Hall mentioned, talking with Representative Pierce, different parties, but certainly colleagues. So I think that my takeaway from that first question is there's an awful lot of collegiality within the General Assembly, even though maybe what's out in the media doesn't always reflect that. You all work very hard together for the betterment of your communities. So appreciate that very much. Okay, so as the moderator, I'm going to use my moderator opportunity and call an audible. So I'd like to hear, I'd like to ask, what issues did you hear most from your constituents? Maybe they weren't legislation, but what are your constituents talking about? I'm going to go with you, Representative Hall, since you were the last one. You're first up.
So I have a very interesting district. I'm about 50% Democrat, almost 50% Republican. So just about every vote that I take irritates half my district. So I've talked to Representative Pierce about this, and there used to be quite a few of us in that chamber that sweated, most of the votes that we had to take, and now there's very few that have to do that. I mean, there's nothing, it just depended on what week it was, really. I mean, at Senate Bill 1, I got a lot of feedback on that from local elected officials and then just homeowners. Like that was just, I mean, I know we're going to talk a lot more about that one later on. But, that some of these bills, I think people think when you vote yes or you vote no, that you're 100% yes or 100% no. Well, these bills are, sometimes they have multiple facets, and some of the bills cover just a lot of different, similar topics, but a lot of things in there. So you may only be 51% in favor of it. And that's, those are the things I try to explain that to people when they reach out to my office is they think that I hate or love, whatever. And sometimes it's just, you may be 55% yes at that moment with the information that you have. So you vote yes. And sometimes you're a no for the same reasons. And it's just a difficult to get people because, and I'm guilty of this too. We have hundreds of bills coming through there. And when people reach out, they're usually really passionate about one thing. And it's hard to be in that same headspace that they're in about that one issue, that's when you're passing out, 30 bills that day. So I try desperately to reply, and if somebody calls in and wants me to call them back, I try to give them a call back, as quickly as I can. But it was a hodgepodge of things. But Senate Bill 1 was probably, by far the most contacts I got this session.
Representative Pierce.
Yeah, for me, there are 2 main issues that I got the most mail on during the session. One were utility issues and concerns about bills about small modular reactors, promoting those, how that might impact rates, and how you were going to balance kind of the risk of moving to this energy transition. So I heard a lot from my constituents about the various utility bills that we're moving through. And then also a lot about education, particularly from teachers, just concerned about school funding overall. And then, also what role vouchers and charter schools might have on impacting funding streams for traditional public schools. And then what will be, the role of teachers in having a say in how their schools are operated and how they run. And so those issues were common things I would hear about throughout the session.
Representative Mayfield.
Obviously, property tax was a big thing, but it wasn't as big as I thought. I actually went through and counted out of 700 responses to my pre-legislative survey. I went through and counted, and only 34 said anything about property tax. I was also in another chamber style of legislative forum where we use the little red and green cards. And when we asked the audience how many want property tax reform, out of an audience of roughly 90 people, How many do you think raised the green card and said, we really desperately need property tax reform? Any ideas? Two. 2 out of 90. Now, it's a different audience. You had a lot of elected officials. You have a lot of business people who appreciate the fact that you have to have a vibrant community to attract people. And on the other side of the coin, when I'm speaking to constituents who legitimately, I had one township establish a fire territory, they raised their rate 600%. So anything that the state did that would save you $300 was offset by the $500 increase you had just from a township. That doesn't include your schools and your county and so forth. So it was so complex. But the general public, unless you were going to tell them you're getting a refund or your property taxes are going down, they did not want to hear anything you had to say. So that really cut off that conversation. There wasn't a lot of give and take. There wasn't an opportunity to say, this is what we're doing. We're trying to fix the infrastructure of the formula so that on the long run, it's going to benefit you. This was the third major rewrite of property taxes in 30 years, the third time. So it is so hard to tweak one area of that without affecting another because there are so many factors involved. So even though we heard a lot about it, it depends on who it was coming from, whether they wanted the reform or whether they wanted more money. And it was a challenging discussion to have.
Thank you. I just want to comment because I actually asked those I work with, the staff, I said, would you please comb through all of the voicemail, emails, I have my own tally, and can you come up with the top 10 bills that caused the most consternation, concern, reaction from constituents? And 8 of them, I put 8 of them on the challenges side because they were challenges, and it's property taxes, our Medicaid changes, that really got people engaged and concerned. So that was Senate Bill 2. We also heard making our school board races partisan, heard so much from you on those matters. These are all bills that actually ended up passing. So I didn't, some things you were successful working together with me and other legislators to get those things changed, amended out of bills. But these are bills that did make it through the session on this. The other one would be Senate Bill 289 that started out as that anti-DEI bill and now is non-discrimination in employment and education. Heard a lot from businesses to our educators about that bill. And of course, what we didn't hear about, but definitely heard about it since, was the changes to House Bill 1001, which is the budget. We didn't hear about how the governor is going to be able to redact and take back those IU elected alumni trustees. We did not hear that because it was put in right at the very end. And so Hoosiers didn't have a chance to even have input. But I certainly have received many, many, many emails, texts, calls since then. So that was in House Bill 1001. And then other education matters. One of the changes in how we are funding education, there have been changes. We are now a universal choice voucher state. We also made changes in sharing of referendum dollars and property taxes with charter schools. That happened in this session, and that caused some serious reaction from constituents. But another area that I don't know if that really was of concern was in the last biennium budget, the decision was made to offer relief to parents in funding curriculum materials, textbooks, I'm a mom of 3. It was about close to $200 for each of my children that I would have to pay for those curriculum fees. And we tried unsuccessfully for years to get those put into the budget. And in 2023, we were successful. And there was a line item that there would be relief for parents in covering textbook and curriculum fees. This session, what happened, those dollars, that was erased, and the majority putting the budget together said they're going to fold it into the overall funding formula. In the general fund, we will cover those in the way that we fund schools. So when you see that number of how our schools are funded, the curriculum fees are folded into that, which shows a very minuscule, for some schools, not even an increase, for our school corporations, our school districts. But that includes a line item that was rolled into how our schools are going to be funded. And there is very much serious concern because of Senate Bill 1, property taxes, because of the sharing of referendum dollars, and then that the textbook fees have to be covered in those dollars. That is concerning our school districts and how they're going to make ends meet. And we're already seeing sort of some of that fallout. So I heard those bills, feedback on those bills the most from you, and I appreciate every single outreach that I did receive. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative Yoder. Representative Heaton?
Yes, okay. Well, I kind of, when you talk about the property tax issue, Senate Bill 1, I didn't hear a lot about it until after March 17th, when they had that big rally on St. Patrick's Day up at the State House. A lot of people wearing green T-shirts. And and then that kind of got things worked up a little bit. And then, of course, about 6 weeks ago, when we got our statement from local government and saw where, well, my taxes there in Vigo County has been just doing this over the last few years. And my assessed valuation for next year is up $146,000. So I'm here, not only hearing about it, but I'm going to have other people hear about it from me about that issue. But it's kind of, it's all over the place. But I think probably early on was the partisan school board bill that I heard. And locally in Terre Haute, I met with Marie Thies, who's the ISTA Teachers Union rep, and I like Marie, and we have a great relationship. We talk over coffee about it, and another teacher there also. But and J.D. Prescott, Representative Prescott from the east side of the state, he had that bill in the House, and Senator Gary Byrne, I think, had it in the Senate, and the Senate passed it, and then we looked at it and changed it around and so forth. And as that turned out, I believe you can put down if you want to, and this deals with a general election. You can put down whether you're Republican, Democrat, independent, or just leave it blank. And I heard some loud voices on the right that says we need that, and so anyway, we gave more options and so forth as far as that bill goes. But sometimes you scratch your head and think why are we doing this? But anyway, it's just the way it turned out. But it's and I can go on and on. Speaking of schools and funding, I've got the school runs for Richland Bean Blossom School Corporation as well as Monroe County Community School Corporation. So that was, I think there's always concern about, funding for our schools, traditional public schools as well as charter schools and so forth. But that was something that didn't get cut. And as far as the funding goes for the schools, it's 2% first year and then the second year of the biennium. So when you think about it, it was a 5% increase because 2% the second year of that first year increase, it really comes to 3% instead of 2%. But so that was something that is so, very important. But when you look at the budget, what we had to look at too was the Medicaid funding, and it has just gone up and up and up over the last few years. And so we tried to get a handle on that as well, and that came through House and Road Act 1001. So, but there's a lot of things that we're looking at. But as far as Representative Pierce mentioned, as far as I think it was House and Road Act 1007 deals with nuclear energy. An important thing also is, you look at healthcare reform, and I happened to be with Chairman Bradford Barrett yesterday for about 5 hours in a golf cart in Noblesville. We talked a little bit about that, but and I said, "Well, Brad, were you happy with the final results?" He says, "Well, we really had to give and take towards the end," and so he was happy, but he wasn't happy, and so forth. But that's something that here in Indiana we got to look at, and we look at that gets into the pharmacy benefit managers and so forth. It's a discussion in and of itself, but that's something that we got to keep looking at and tweaking it and see what the future holds with that. So, but it's very important with businesses and those employers who has those group health benefits for their employees, and I think they're going to be seeing a decrease in those premiums in the next few years to come.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Oh, I'm sorry.
If I
Yes.
can compare,
Yeah.
so Representative Heaton said something about the challenges of property taxes. He mentioned that his assessed value went up significantly. Mine went down a little bit. My net assessed value still went up a little bit, and my taxes went up. I couldn't write that check fast enough before they changed it. So that is the challenge of trying to make a statewide policy
Right.
for a property tax formula, because every single unit of government, takes a role in that, and it's so hard to try and benefit everybody.
No, that's a good summary of kind of the process. Certainly, I've made a career out of property taxes, so as a life learner, I'm really happy that we've completely changed the system. I've got something new to learn. So let's put 2025 in the rearview mirror and kind of let's turn to Senate Bill 1. You all have kind of mentioned it. So my question is, okay, who do we think, who's the winner? Who's the biggest winner out of Senate Bill 1? This is the lightning round, Representative Heaton. You'll go first.
Okay, so short answer then, right?
Right, because I want to make sure that there's Q&A, so there may be
Yeah.
other people that have got better questions than I.
I would have to say, the taxpayers. And so bottom line, but and it seems like once we passed that, then it seemed like the week before, our spring and fall statements came out, and so people saw, in case I saw mine went up this way, but we're looking at as far as the future, as far as 2026 payable for the 2025 year, but so I'd say the taxpayers.
Great. Senator Yoder?
Well, we're at a chamber event. I will speak to a winner would be $1.2 billion in tax relief for businesses. And that, I think, probably is one of, those are some of the winners in Senate Bill 1.
I would have to agree. It's anyone who pays property tax, not because it was such a great fix-all bill, but because it adds a transparency. So now you're more aware of how they came to that figure, and we controlled the growth so that 90% of the people will pay less than what they would have without that bill, and about 60% will pay less than they did. I think the market itself will sort of iron itself out over time. So it wasn't the ticker tape parade type of bill, but it did address the underlying problems.
So I think it's difficult to know because the bill's pretty complicated, and I've seen different runs. We had a very short period of time, like 3 hours, to try to figure out what the bill was doing, because it was basically written as a second reading amendment. But I think that for those who have the more valuable homes, I think they will get the bulk of the relief. So my understanding is it's 10% up to $300 of a cut. And I've seen some data that suggests that if you're in a very modest home, like $125,000, $150,000, you may actually end up paying a little more, which is strange. And then the other kind of group of people who got left out were renters. You know, my district, I have lots of rent. I basically have the city of Bloomington, northern 2/3 is basically my district, and a lot of renters in there. And the renters are paying that property tax through their rent, because the landlord then takes the rental money and uses that to pay the property taxes. And the House Democrats, we tried to get some relief for renters in there, because they're not going to benefit from SB 1, but they're going to continue to pay that rent. And so it would have been nice to have something. Right now, there's a deduction that you have on your income tax if you're a renter that you can take. That really hasn't been changed significantly for a very long time. So to me, it remains to be seen how it's all going to play out. I think it's interesting that I've talked to some local government officials, and they're all hiring consultants to come in and try to explain to them what their revenue is actually going to be, so they can begin to think about their budget. And that's, you got a complicated bill when the consultant class will be working overtime to help local officials understand what exactly they're going to have to work with. So we're just going to have to see what happens.
So I'll touch on a different angle. Senate Bill 1, obviously had property tax relief, but then there were just accountability in your elected officials. So one of the things that it did, it decoupled your local income tax rate from your share of the levy. So now every year, county councils, I saw a few members in here, they have to vote to affirm the rate that they want for the following year. So when I was on the county council in Jackson County for almost 6 years, and I got the benefit of the 2016 council that voted for a lit public safety tax that I never had to vote for. Every year it was just automatically reinstated. Well, now you have to say, hey, we need that money this year, and we're going to take an affirmative vote to keep that rate at, I think Monroe County's 2.1%. So this will kind of, it silos that local income tax also. So that right now Monroe County has a local income tax council. So the city of Bloomington, 8 of the 9 members of the city council could vote to increase the local income tax for everyone in the county. And we've talked about this, I think, here before. They did that in 22, and they raised it like 54%. Well, there were people outside the city of Bloomington that were very upset, and they said, hey, we don't even live in the city of Bloomington, but somehow these city council members could raise our tax. And it's unfair for them because they don't have an option to vote for or against that body. So this eliminates that now. So that the county council will have a vote for income tax for every county taxpayer, and then the city of Bloomington will have one that just goes on the city of Bloomington. So you'll see different rates for people depending on where they live, which is honestly the way it should be. If you're living in the city and you want to pay for those, added services, then you'll get to do that now. Another thing that it did with bonds, there's a 1-year cooling off period now. So if you had, like in Jackson County, I'll use them for example again, we had before I got on the council, they had a jail, and that jail bond was falling off. And when that bond was falling off, they thought, hey, we need to make sure we keep our rate flat, because if we ever need that money in the future, we want to make sure we don't have to come back and take a bad vote to get that, to build that rate back up. So they would just build another building. So we built a judicial center, a really nice one. So I think it was like $15 or $20 million. And so this will give you more accountability. So it's not just this ride the votes of other people before you. Now you're going to have to explain your votes, why you wanted the money, why you needed the money, why you needed that project. So I think that's a huge, for me, that was a big deal, to eliminate that local income tax council, put that burden back on your local elected officials to say, we need it and here's why, or we don't need it, so we're going to lower your rate. So I think that was a huge win in Senate Bill 1 also.
Senator Yoder.
Just to sort of add a nuance, the concern is for those communities who do need a new project, there has to be bonding. And if that income tax is going to be revisited every year, there will be a concern. We will need to look at how can communities like ours that is looking to build a new jail, how will they be able to get a bond for a tax that is going to have to be revisited every year? There isn't that certainty there. And we didn't plan for that with the way it was written in Senate Bill 1. So I think there is going to need to be some revisiting of that language to ensure that communities can still make these investments and that they will be able to receive a bond for those new projects.
Well, the good news is we've been fixing property taxes since 1973, so I'm confident that there will be more fixes along the lines. I want to make sure that there's time for the audience. If anybody has any questions, if you don't, that not a big deal. I've got a couple more, but is there anybody that would like to ask a question of our panel members? Yes.
Thank you. Having served for over 30 years in public health, that's always my kind of take. First, I want to say thank you all for showing up today and sharing with us. So with the budget cuts and being in a state who clearly has not valued public health over the years, but a few years ago decided to put some funding into that, but yet it's being pulled back, I think everybody would say, we don't really like taxes, we don't like property taxes, but we do like services. And even with changes with the statewide mobile food, that takes money away from local government. So my question is, what do you say to our local officials about how they're supposed to fund services, I'm going to say like public health, but other services that people expect and need with fewer resources and less funding?
Please.
I think that you're going to have local officials look with greater detail at needs versus wants versus luxuries. I mean, you're literally going to be breaking it down and needing to justify to their immediate constituents how they're going to accomplish that. It will be challenging. On the public health, I prefer to think of that, because I know we cut it back significantly. That isn't, I don't believe that is because we don't like public health funding. I think that was a combination of, we put all this money out there, counties are still ramping up their programs to get where they can utilize that, and at this point, and under these financial circumstances, we went with the figure that was spent. You had, the statewide, the counties had spent X amount of dollars, and there were monies that were yet to be committed because they were still in the thought process. Granted, they will probably be, I would hope, reinstated in the future, just not right now. So you've got to work with what you created over the last 2 years, and then as the economy changes, we'll have to see where that goes, and hopefully we will be reinstating those funds. So I don't want to say we've cut that Health First program, because I don't believe we have, and I don't think that's our intent. We just had to work within the framework. The biggest surprise, I know, is one of the things is when we got down to the very end of the budget cycle, when we knew that it was going to be a tight budget year, or tight budget cycle, and it was even worse than we anticipated. So we had to make those adjustments, and hopefully in the next budget cycle, we'll be able to, start adjusting those in the upward numbers.
Great, thank you. Anybody else? Representative Hall?
Yeah, so I think, in 2023, we appropriated, I think it was $225 million, I could be off on that number, for that Health First Indiana Fund. And I voted for that because I knew that there was, I think it was it was either $1 turns into $7 in benefit, or like $14, I could be off on that, but it was substantial. And we had a lot of room to improve, so we would probably see the higher end of that range. And, just like, I think part of your question was, how do these local governments deal with the reduced funding? Same way we did. We had a budget that, from the December forecast, that looked like we were going to be able to do a lot of the things that we really wanted to do. And when you see a revenue forecast in April that shows $2 billion less than what you had in December, you have to make those decisions, like, what do we really need and what are the wants? And, funding schools, funding public safety. I mean, we did $80 million in the Health First Indiana Fund, which is a reduction, from 2025 or 23 numbers, but that was new money in 2023. So it's still, it's not that wasn't there for 30 years, then all of a sudden it's just gone. So there's still an investment there. It's just not as substantial as what we would have done had we had that budget forecast that we were hoping for. But I still think there's opportunity, that the economy, I think we were at when we got the first budget or first forecast, I think it was in December, it was like a 15% chance of recession. And in April, it was like a 60% chance of recession. And I'm not looking at my own retirement account, it seems like things are moving in the right direction again now. And so I'm hoping that we see some daylight, I guess, in the future here, and we can come back and revisit that, because I think that is important. And there's obviously there's things we can improve, but public health is definitely one that's still, I think a really important thing for our State House and caucus both. But
Thank you, Representative Hall. Senator Yoder.
So just to put a number on it, the new biennium budget has a 60% decrease in public health funding. We're not talking just shaving, 60% cut in funding. And we had not invested in public health any increase for 20 years. So we gave our public health departments 1 year to ramp up and to fix this gap. And a department, our local health departments, that had learned how to just get by, learned how to be conservative, learned how to do more with less. Then we make this big plea to them saying, we have not made this investment, and for the first time, Hoosiers' life expectancy has dropped. So we are going to make this investment, finally, in public health. And in 1 year later, we're going to take that away because based on that we didn't see them spending enough in that first year. That's just unreasonable. I would say thank you to our local public health departments for not just irresponsibly spending all the money they were given, that they were trying to roll this out in a responsible way. And it does seem that the forecast of the $2.4 billion shortfall, much of that we asked, again, our public health departments to really take the brunt of that hit. So this wasn't just asking our public health departments to do, to step up and do more with less. We had already been asking them to do that. And then we finally made the investment. And then a year later, sort of pulling that rug out and saying, oops, sorry, we're going to have to now ask you to go back and make those adjustments. So I appreciate that question and wanted to put sort of some numbers
Thank
there.
you, Senator Yoder. Representative Heaton.
Yeah, and thank you, for that question. And towards those last day or so, when we're negotiating the budget 1001, we did put in a $2 cigarette tax increase. Okay, and to my premium cigar smokers, they didn't like the $3 cigar tax increase. But that was something our caucus, we talked about for several months. And it was almost like that last hour, okay, we got to do it, and we did. And so there's, I think I read Senator Bray mention, there's a fine line there as far as, if you raise it high enough, then maybe that 16-year-old, 17-year-old may say, hey, heck with that, I ain't gonna smoke cigarettes. And on the other hand, the older generation, they may say, well, hey, I love these things. I'm gonna continue to smoke. But we did that, and I don't know how many hundreds of millions that's gonna help. But as far as that would go to Medicaid and so forth, but that's something to the last hour, the last minute, we put that in there in the budget. So.
Well, I appreciate the question, appreciate the panel's candor. I think one of the takeaways that I hear is it's it's an important issue, and the General Assembly will continue to revisit it, which I think is very positive. So I understand not the right outcome that we all were hoping for, but it's not something that at least you all have indicated that you don't see value in continuing to be supportive of. So appreciate that. Anybody else from, yes, sir.
Thanks, Rich. Thank you all for coming this morning. I wanted to try to get some clarity on public education. And the revenue shortfall that you all mentioned with the forecast. So expansion of school choice, as it's called by some, will be a $400 million in the second year of the biennium. That's the number I've seen. That expanding vouchers will cost $400 million in the second year of the biennium. Representative, you said you have the school runs with you for traditional public schools, which you're saying are getting a 2% increase. Is that what you said?
Yes.
So traditional public schools are getting a 2% increase each year of the biennium.
That also includes textbooks and curriculum fees.
Right. So help us square then the sort of articles we're seeing where Monroe County schools are projected to lose $18 million. Bryan County schools, I think, were $1 to $2 million. I don't know what RBB is. I'm just having trouble kind of squaring up the numbers here, and take us through that choice of a $400 million increase for vouchers when we see a $2.4 million shortfall projected in the forecast. That's a pretty big decision when we're looking at education. There's a lot of discussion between K through 12 education, but not bifurcating it, talking about traditional public schools versus charters and vouchers. So I'm trying to get your message on that. Because it's something we talked about a lot here in Monroe County, and trying to be a little more informed. So, thanks.
Well, I'll start the debate. There is one. So the funding formula, the thing that we've talked about is these curricular materials, which you used to call textbooks, is now, instead of being a separate line item appropriation, is now within the funding formula. So when you say you're getting 2% this year and 2% next year, that includes money that normally would not have been in the formula. So if you were to back out that textbook money and make it a separate line item again, that 2% would go down. So you have to, so understanding the runs and their practical effect can be a little bit challenging sometimes. So in a time when the state was challenged with revenues and wanting to do well for public schools, it's a little bit perplexing to me that the decision was made to go ahead and essentially make the vouchers universal by including that last percentage of the wealthiest families in the state. Because as a policymaker, that money buys us absolutely zero, nothing. There is no benefit to that expenditure because the wealthiest people can already afford to send their kids to private school. They've made that decision. They can afford it. They're doing it. The only change will be they will now be subsidized. They will receive, I guess, $7,000 or some amount off of their tuition, which, by the way, you know, if your private school tuition is, say, $14,000 a year, it's nice to get $7,000, but if you're a lower income family, that $7,000 is not going to get you to whatever the prevailing private school tuition is. So at a time when you have to make difficult decisions about your budget and where your resources are going to go, to me, it was not a good decision to divert a significant amount of money to the wealthiest families who I think could probably get by okay without that subsidy, and that would have freed up some other millions of dollars for us to help traditional public schools. So I think that's where the debate is.
Thank you, Representative Pierce. Anybody else like to respond?
Well, other than disagreeing with parts of Representative Pierce, I got data on Monroe County because it was brought up. Your student count is way down. You've lost 600 kids in the last decade. So I don't know the causes for that. I'm not saying that, you know, it's anything. I think that somebody needs to flesh out some of these underlying numbers because you're down. You were at 10,659 or 69, and now you're down to 10,069 a decade later. That's a lot of money. In addition to, but your funding has continued to increase. So I'm not your CFO for that school system, but I think that a very critical set of eyes needs to be put on these budgets because you also have referendums for teacher pay. Now, if you have to pass a referendum every 7 years to keep your payroll going, that's not sustainable in my eyes. So I don't have a direct answer to your question, but I'm not so sure that the school choice program has much to do with it. The school choice program, the families who receive that get less than what they would have gotten if they'd gone to public school. They're going to get money to go to school, and that is the whole basis, is the money follows a child. You get more if you go to public school, you get less if you go to a private school. As far as the lower income can't afford to go to private school anyway, they have so many programs. I've yet to find a family who could not go to a private school based on the program that school offers to offset those costs. I've never seen a child refused because they couldn't pay. That has not come to my attention because they find a way, these organizations find a way for these kids to attend the school of their choice. But this is a little concerning when you see that precipitous drop of ADM, even as the funding continues to go up. I don't have an answer for you. Monroe County seems to be in a worse situation than almost every other school system that I've looked at.
Thank you. Representative Hall.
So I've got more to say, but just to add on to Rep. Mayfield, Monroe County schools in 2020 were collecting $42 million from property taxes. And after 2 referendums in 2025, they're collecting over $70 million with the same reduction in kids. So I've talked to folks at the State House this year, and they were there, talking about Senate Bill 1 and the effects it would have on the school. And I pointed that out, that they are collecting, I think it was like 60-some percent, 68% more than they were in 2020. And, before I got to the State House, the General Assembly had made a decision to fund students and not just systems. And when you hear the stories, there's no public charter school in Brown County. And, there's my kids go to the same traditional public school that I went to, and it's a fantastic choice for our family, and I love it. And I'm thankful that I have a good school to send them to. Not every family has a great traditional public school to send their kids to. So when you hear the stories from them and you hear that, hey, this was not a good fit for my child, they love the fact that they have a choice as a family and as that student to find a school that best suits them, rather than just be locked into this school because of what their zip code is or because of what their income is. Now they have a choice to go somewhere else. And that individual student, I think it's important to like see these kids that if they're in a school system that they're failing in, that they have an option to go somewhere where they can succeed. And I think there's value in that. And obviously there's this struggle over, who gets the most money or who gets the biggest increase. And I'm looking at these stories from people whose kids are doing better because we have these options for them. So that's important to me.
I want to just sort of champion MCCSC I don't want to end on a note of disparaging MCCSC. This local community, our community, made the decision based on the argument that they made to pass the referendum. Those were decisions made by voters knowing what was at stake. And for state legislators to say, no, that's too much, that is an overreach. Voters here voted on that. We know that the state's cap before this year was paying for teacher pay was $40,000 a year. And this community decided, or MCCSC voters decided, we want to attract and keep the best, and we're going to pass a referendum to support higher pay for our teachers. And that's what happened. And it was a source, I will say, pride when we came this year to address teacher pay. And in Monroe County, the average for Monroe County, those individuals, they showed us how many teachers would be impacted if we moved salaries for teachers from $40,000 a year to $45,000 a year. Well, that was the bill that we were looking at this year. And actually, we did increase it to $45,000 a year. But they let us see by county how many teachers that was going to impact to be able to say this is going to be a good thing. One teacher in our county made less than $45,000 a year. Because they made more, because our voters said, we want our teachers making more. We want to make an investment. And that was a source of pride, because we had some that are 800 teachers and 500 teachers. But this community said, no, we're going to treat our teachers better. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for making that decision, because it is an investment that's worth it. So to our RBB administration, teachers, and staff, thank you. To our MCCSC administration, teachers, and staff, thank you. Thank you for working so hard every day.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Representative Heaton?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
hey, friend, I'll share these numbers with you afterwards, and I appreciate the comment. One thing I want to say as far as there in Terre Haute, in Vigo County, we've seen a decrease in the student count over the last several years. And Clay County, just over to the east of there, they've had a slight increase. And I know several families are sending their kids over to Northview, North Clay. My grandkids, they're all in traditional public schools now, but you know, Allison, my daughter, she wanted to homeschool Daniel and Elise and Seth, but the other two, they went right into Staunton Elementary. And so it was their choice to do, and they're getting fabulous, you know, when it comes to education and just all the other activities and, you know, track and sports and so forth, that type of thing. But it's, and then getting into the property taxes too, a little bit change the subject here, but, you know, Vigo County, your taxes are going up, but you come over to Clay County, they're low, very low. And Terra Pierce people going to vote with their feet, and they're moving out of the county and going over to Clay County. So anyway, but it's you know, like we've said earlier, the money follows the child, and it does, and so we'll see how it goes this upcoming year and a half, 2 years.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to the audience. Oh, I've got one. We're wrapping. We're 6 minutes away from deadline, so.
As a retired teacher, I'm always glad to hear that the system is being addressed, and particularly the salaries. I doubt that much is being done at the non-teacher level that could be made more streamlined and more productive. What I was questioning is Peggy she was talking about Monroe County and the 10,000 students. Is that Monroe County community schools, or is that Monroe County schools overall?
That's Monroe County School District.
Okay, so we're not addressing our private schools nor the RBB system.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Jen, you.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you for everything that you've done. This is not an easy session. I think one of the messages that I'm hearing is there's things that need to be adjusted moving forward. Sometimes the news coming out from the state makes it feel like, well, the locals will have to figure it out. You'll have to do more with less. But knowing each one of you, I know that you all are very accessible and always willing to partner and help. So as we are trying to figure out a way forward in some challenging transitional times, how would you like us to do it? And specifically, are there certain timelines this summer as you're in, you know, summer committees? How would you like information from us? How can we best partner with you to figure out the best ways forward?
I think you're not likely to see much focus from the legislature on fixing things until we get through the local government budget cycle. So I think by the end of this fall, we'll kind of see where things are settling out. And then the legislature is going to make some assessment about whether or not local units have the resources they need and it worked out, or whether something needs a correction. So I think that's the practical thing, is just seeing how the actual numbers play out over this next local government budgeting cycle. So when we get into that fall, when those final votes are taken, what do the tax burdens look like? What do the resources look like? I think that's going to be the main thing. And I would just say overall, whether it's the state budget or the local budget, there's kind of two competing narratives or kind of approaches to this thing, right? So the governor likes to essentially say, he's a business guy. He can cut 5%, with blindfold with his hands tied behind his back. That's easy stuff to do. And so you'd say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And now we're going to have a 5% more efficient state government. They will do the same things they've always done. They'll just do it more efficiently because someone's like being more of a disciplinarian for them. And that's great if that can happen. But I think that actually what's probably happening is 5% less will get done. And maybe people won't miss that 5%. Maybe it won't be a big deal, but for other people, it might be important. And I think that's the same kind of discussion or the prism through which people works. Will local units of government find a way to be even more frugal, more efficient, deliver those same services with less revenue, which would be a good thing for taxpayers, or will just less get done? And I think that's what the legislature is going to have to make an assessment about, through the local budgeting cycle and into the next session.
I also think that there's a lot of one-offs that will need to be addressed. So I'm going to use Morgan County. I have almost the entire county. And I hate getting into the weeds, but on property taxes, you have property tax replacement credits, PTRC counties, and you had some counties that were levy freeze. This goes back a long time. And as we're moving through, my county calls me and they said, this is going to affect us by this much. I'm like, no, it's not. You just have to do this and this. Well, there are about a dozen, there are, 20-some counties that use PTRC. There are maybe a dozen that use levy freezes. My county is one of like 4 that use both, and I was not aware of that. So then they do have further limitations, and we couldn't fix it before the end, but I do have the commitment from the Chair of Ways and Means. We need to find a way to fix that because that has an incredible impact on how the new formula will affect this particular county. And I think we're going to find that as these budget sessions for local governments come around, where we need to make tweaks. Now, luckily, because it's not an appropriation, it can be done in a non-budget session. I think that we are actually going to be looking at some of these as early as August and trying to approach the fixes for that. And you're on both sides of it. You have local government funding, and you have your business members who are very concerned, and business personal property tax is on both sides of that. That $2 million threshold sounds like a lot, but most of the big manufacturing industries, they're way beyond that. So that $2 million catches all the little guys who have to pay their accountant $400 to figure out that they don't owe anything. That's what's going to get caught or wrapped up into that under the $2 million threshold of business personal property tax. So that will help small businesses.
Great. Anybody else? Well, I just want to express my appreciation to the panel members for coming today and sharing your thought. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Heaton.
No, I was just going to make one comment about my good friend down here on the far right. Talked about gray hair and gray facial hair. He can just shave that beard off and he look much younger. So we don't have to,
There you go. Always a good suggestion.
I keep the beard so I can cut my own jawline since I've gained so much weight, so.
Well, let's give a round of applause to our panelists for being here. Thank you very much. I think one thing that I've taken away, well, there are 2 things. One, we're going to continue to mess around with property taxes, which is great for me. Second thing is we'll need the short session because obviously we've got more work to do in the state of Indiana. But I want to express my appreciation to all of you for your public service. It's time away from your families, your business, and your communities, and it's not easy. You've got to respond to constituents. You've got to respond to people who are not your constituents, and all of you are exemplary public service members, so I greatly appreciate it. I'd also like to express my appreciation to the Ellettsville Chamber for allowing me the opportunity to moderate. It's been wonderful, and without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you. Have a great Tuesday.
I want to express our gratitude to our amazing panelists. We don't take it lightly that you're here. We really appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. I also want to thank our moderator for moderating today. Gretchen, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much. Special thanks to our presenting sponsor, Bloomington Board of Realtors, for their generous support. And we want to thank our gold sponsors, Monroe County Farm Bureau and Indiana University Office of the Vice President of University Relations, for making this event possible. We appreciate all of you being here today and taking your time, and also remember to check out our website and look at those events that I mentioned earlier. Thank you so much for being here today.